Hey everybody, today I'm down in Arizona because I have finally been able to get my hands on the new Lexus GX 550 and drive it on-road and off-road, although I will warn you, the off-road trail is not quite as adventurous as I might have liked. In this video, we're going to talk about what the new GX 550 is, what it is not, what it competes against, and why you might want one of these over the competition. I've grabbed the camera from Travis so we can talk about the design of the new GX. What do you think of this new grille, Travis?
Well, it's definitely a departure from the spindle grille, and honestly, I think I'm a fan of it. It's much boxier, a lot more squared off. There are a lot of sections here, but the squared off look is a better fit for the rest of this vehicle.
I agree. I think this is one of the better Lexus grilles in a while. It's very different from the TX where the grille blends into the body colored sections. I'm just not the biggest fan of this sort of like, excessive sideburn motif here. It gives me kind of a very 70s kind of look. We do have these really modern multi-module LED headlights though, which I think look pretty good. And LED fog lights and separate LED cornering lights. That's actually a cornering light right there. It's kind of a cool touch.
Yeah, I think things are fairly well integrated, but there are a lot of pieces and sections that go across here. If that works for you, wonderful. If you like things to be a little bit more similar, this might not be your jam.
Yeah, Lexus says that the reason they did this in a multi-part arrangement, and specifically this bottom section can be replaced independently, is that way if you want to do aftermarket bumpers or add tow hooks, etc., you can just replace that. Also, if you get it scuffed up in your off-roading adventure, it's going to be a little bit easier to replace.
Yeah, that middle section is going to be exclusive to the Overtrail and Overtrail Plus trims, but it is going to be something you can change down the road.
Yep, and this very muddy model is the Overtrail that we've been driving today, so obviously we've got mud on it. You'll definitely notice this is boxier and bigger than the GX has been in the past. Sort of, right between 2-row and 3-row Grand Cherokee in terms of size, right?
It is, and there is quite a bit of room in the vehicle, so it makes pretty good use of this space. These lines, like you said, are definitely taller, square. We've got some strong lines coming through here, some kind of shoulders, and even a little bit farther bumped out on the Overtrail trim to get a little bit wider stance.
Yeah, we get a slightly wider track here, and Overtrail specific Toyo all-terrain tires. These are not the most aggressive all-terrain tire, but they are pretty surprising for a Lexus, and they're 33s. I think you might be able to fit 35s on here, but they wouldn't talk about that, of course. One thing that I was a little bit surprised by is that all the Overtrail models that they have here do have these side steps. Kind of an odd touch for an off-road dedicated vehicle. Of course, they can be unbolted if you want to put rock rails on. And speaking of rails, roof rails up here, you will get a variety of different options available from your Lexus dealer, I should say aftermarket accessories, and Lexus is working with a ton of different accessory manufacturers to make various different parts for the GX as well.
Alex, we got a big change coming around to the back.
Yeah, so are you team hatch or are you team door? Because we used to have a door and now we have a hatch.
I think it's a shame that we're losing the door. I understand why they made that change. It makes it easier for some, harder than others, but either way, we're team hatch now.
Yeah, a pretty decent amount of clearance. I'm 6 feet tall. I have no problem fitting under that hatch because it is a really vertical opening, and that means that hatch ends up really horizontal. Lexus says that they did this because people prefer hatches. Also, it shelters you from the rain a bit more if you're out in the woods. We do have a separately opening glass, but the one functional advantage to the door, obviously a bit of a problem in parallel parking, is that you can put your spare tire on a door in many SUVs with that particular design. So if you upgrade to 35s, there's somewhere to put it. And the spare tire location underneath the vehicle is really only going to accommodate the standard tire sizes that the GX comes with. In terms of styling, we have the new Lexus swoosh running right there across the back. Lexus spelled out, of course, as you saw earlier. And then on the sides, kind of a high-waisted look with the lights being pretty high on the back. They say that's for off-road visibility. And then this lower bulbous section, that houses the sensors for the cross-traffic detection and blind spot monitoring system. I think that is a bit of a controversial look. And if we come down here, this is unfortunately attached with some of the plastic pop rivets that you'd have to pop out, and I don't have that tool. But behind here we have the 2-inch hitch receiver, and then they put the wiring harness connections for the trailer pretty far under the bumper. I think that is a bit of a bummer if you don't like getting down on your knees when you're attaching your trailer. I know some people with mobility issues might have difficulties getting down there, but you'd still be able to stand up and attach your hitch. That could be a bit of a problem for some folks. They said they wanted to keep a really clean look in the back, and that's why they put the wiring harness connections up under the bumper. Now we should talk about ground clearance, because that is a bit controversial with the GX, and there are a few moving pieces here. Ground clearance is going to be just over 8.6 inches standard, just under 8.9 inches if you get the model with the 33-inch tires. And as far as ground clearance is concerned, bigger tires are going to be the only way you will get more ground clearance in a GX. And that's because of what's happening back here. We have a solid axle in the back, not an independent suspension, which is what you're going to find in most of the competition. And that means that the ground clearance from that rear differential to the ground, that's going to be the lowest point, and it's not going to change unless you get bigger diameter tires. Now, why is this controversial? Well, because if you take a look at a Grand Cherokee or a Defender or any of that category of vehicles with an adaptive air suspension system and independent suspension, what's going on is they're effectively pushing the wheels and tires down because they can. They can inflate an airbag here, push the wheel down. In a vehicle with a solid rear axle, that wouldn't help too much because all you'd be doing is moving the axle away from the body. Yes, that would improve certain angles, but it wouldn't improve your ground clearance. Now, in those vehicles, yes, you can get over 11 inches of ground clearance, but that's simply along the center line, because ground clearance to some of those critical suspension components is actually going to be a little bit lower than some versions of the Lexus GX. So actual effective ground clearance and which is better is going to depend on the kind of terrain that you're on and the exact situation that you may or may not encounter. In a vehicle with a solid axle like this, you could always park this tire high up on whatever profile of off-road obstacle you have, and you've effectively created a big triangle underneath the vehicle of extra clearance around that differential. In something like a Grand Cherokee, you wouldn't necessarily be able to do that because the suspension is independent, so that side is going to ride up and down, and it's not going to have as much of a change against ground clearance on the differential, which is why you have that adaptive air suspension capability. So your exact off-road capability is going to depend on so many different factors. You cannot simply say this is worse than X or better than X because it has a solid axle, because it has ground clearance of X or Y. It's really the combination of everything together. For some Lexus traditionalists, the most controversial change happens under the hood, where we find a twin-turbo V6, not a naturally aspirated V8 engine. Although there's definitely an advantage to choosing this over that old model because we get 349 horsepower, 479 pound-feet of torque. That is a ton more torque than we found in the outgoing V8. We obviously don't know any details on long-term dependability and reliability for this V6 engine, but it has a Lexus logo on it, so you can bet it's probably going to be less expensive to keep around than the twin-turbo engines from the European alternatives. It's mated to a standard 10-speed automatic transmission and standard full-time four-wheel drive with a twist, because this full-time four-wheel drive system uses a true center differential. It doesn't use a multi-plate clutch pack or a selectable clutch pack, etc. All four tires are always motivating the vehicle forward. It of course has a 2-speed transfer case and a low ratio mode. Another interesting twist is that you can choose whether or not you want to lock the torsion center in 4 low. So if you want 4 low but an open center differential, you can do that, and that's not something you can do in the majority of the competition. Downside, no front locker in this design. Also downside, fuel economy. It could be a bit better, let's be honest. 17 miles per gallon combined is what we're going to find in this model. We don't have official specifications for the upcoming hybrid version of the GX, however. We know that's coming. It's going to be available at the beginning in China, so stay tuned for some of the Chinese market specifications. It's possible they may change a little bit for North America, but it's probably going to be basically that same system. It's a 4-cylinder engine, turbocharged, mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission and a single electric motor, so basically the same hybrid system we find in the new Tacoma. That should give this somewhere between 25 and 30 miles per gallon combined. We don't know official numbers, but the rumors have said that Land Cruiser, which is effectively this in the Toyota lineup, should get around 26, 27 miles per gallon combined. To show you everything the new GX has to offer on the inside, I have moved over to the most Luxury Plus trim. And yes, I do mean Luxury Plus because that is the name of this trim. Yes, with an actual plus symbol at the end. But silly names aside, this has the most comfortable and the most adjustable seat available in the GX. Most notably, we have a power extending thigh cushion here. We still have two-way adjustable lumbar support, which I think is a little bit of an unusual twist because this seat is really, really comfortable. I found this the most comfortable seat for my body shape probably available in this segment, certainly among the best for the limited amount of time that I've had in it. Mainly because this has one of the best massage features available. There are approximately 20 air bladders in the seat bottom and seat back cushion, and you control everything via the infotainment system in the center console. I just think the lack of four-way lumbar is a little weird. We also have a powered tilt telescopic steering column with 3-position memory, and the passenger seat has the exact same range of motion as the driver's seat. If this seat is an indication of other things to come in the Lexus lineup, I am really excited because I hope this seat makes its way to the RX, the TX, and anything else with an X in it. Thanks to the boxy proportions, front seat headroom is definitely solid, even in this model with the panoramic moonroof. As you can see, I have about 1.5 inches of headroom left there. And if you don't want the moonroof in your overtrail model, you can actually get even the top end trim with a moonroof delete to give you extra headroom and the extra load carrying capacity on the roof. But let's check out the back seats. This has a surprisingly traditional second row design in that these seats flip and fold forward and they don't slide forward and backward. So this seat position is all I get here in the second row. Headroom is definitely solid again, a little bit less than the front seats because of the sort of stadium style seating that we find in here. Still have maybe about 3/4 of an inch, however. Legroom, on the other hand, is a little bit more limited than I had expected. In this second row, you can see I have, I don't know, maybe about 3 or 4 inches of legroom left. I think some rear-facing child seats would be tricky to put in here with me in the front seat, especially since this second row does not slide further rearward. Let's talk about how you get back there into the second row. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold this seat forward so you can see what's going on. Leave that in that position right there. But as you could see, they flip forward and then they tumble forward like that. So it is a combination motion. Getting in, you will notice that the body inside the GX becomes smaller and smaller and smaller as it gets to the rear, even though the roof line is very consistent. So the floor keeps going up and up and up. And that's why if I tried to put my head back there toward the head restraint, I really just can't. There's just not enough headroom going on. However, if I were to try and sit in, I would say more of a normal seating position, my head's touching the ceiling, but I could probably do this for 20-30 minutes if I needed to. Comfort-wise, the real problem for an adult is going to be the height off the floor of this seat bottom cushion. As you can see, it is really darn close to the ground, and that means there's just not a lot of leg support. Now, the rear seats move in kind of an interesting way. There's actually a power control over here on each side. So check this out as I fold it in. Well, that took an unconscionable amount of time to figure out. Apparently, you cannot power fold the third row seats unless the door is open from these buttons. I guess that makes sense because you don't want to accidentally power fold someone that's in the seat. At any rate, let's go ahead and check this out. The third row seat, as you can see, operates in a really interesting fashion. The seat bottom cushion actually pops in under that seat. I'll let you see that, and then continue folding. Then this seat folds on top of that. So they're really trying to maximize the amount of cargo space available when this has the third row folded. And logically, they've probably given up a little bit of third row comfort for that. Now, if you get the 2-row model, you do get considerably more storage space in the back because everywhere that this third row seat goes is then going to be available to you as extra cargo capacity. There are 3 sets of controls for folding the third row seats. You can find them on the front of the wheel well on either side of the third row or back there in the cargo area. As far as child seat anchors go, a lot of folks ask about this. We have top tether anchors for 1 seat position in the third row, just 1. So that's really where they say you should be putting the child seat. Aside from that, we have latch anchors in the outboard second row seating positions. And if you get the captain's chairs, which is what this model has on it, then you get 2 sets of top tether anchors. As far as legroom goes in the third row, keep in mind again, this second row seat does not slide forward and backward, but I do have a reasonable amount of legroom. Just check out that distance between my knee and the actual seat bottom, of course. So Travis, how much room do you have back there in the rear?
So I have pretty decent room. Things get a little bit tighter when you get this large panoramic roof over the smaller moonroof. And this adjustable armrest is usually a nice feature, but it squishes everything in just a little bit.
Yeah, I like the sunshades there on the side doors, and you can really see that kick up in the rear door sheet metal there right next to your shoulder. Up here we have a really innovative touch, something that we're starting to see in more and more vehicles, especially EVs. It's an electrochromatic moonroof, so you can choose opaque or less opaque there, but it does not open. How do you feel about the not opening part?
You know, honestly, I don't mind. I prefer to just have some more light coming in versus needing that extra air. So that would actually be the option that I go with. And it's a nice feature, the switch from opaque to clear. It really does take the glare out of it, but still give a little bit of light.
And I like the fact that you can still actually close a solid shade over it, so that's really kind of cool. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, two-way adjustable headrests there, and then again, everybody keep in mind we are in the top end trim here. You'll notice that the bolstering is not terribly aggressive on the passenger or the driver's seats up front, so larger folks shouldn't have too much of a problem in here. But I have to say that in the darker colors, this interior comes off as a little bit austere. Some of that also is the particular materials choices that Lexus has used in here. So if we move over to the front doors, we have a stitched imitation leather section right there just for this insert in the middle of the door and the armrest. The rest of the door is made from injection molded plastic. So soft touch on the upper part there, harder touch lower, and then we have a matching upholstery insert to the seats right there in the front doors, but with a bit of different texture. So you can see we have those hexagonal shapes in there, and we don't find those repeated in the seat bottom leather. Still think that's kind of a cool touch though. Moving over to the dashboard is really where you're going to notice the new Lexus design. And this is something that we also see in the Lexus TX. It's really much more of a clean, perhaps colder look than we're used to from Lexus. So injection molded upper section of the dashboard, kind of rubbery in texture, kind of a storage slot right there. Also soft touch materials lower on the dashboard, including a soft touch cover to that glove box. The glove box itself, it's sort of a two-slot design, something we've seen from Lexus for a while. I suspect larger tablet computers would have troubles fitting inside. But what's more interesting about this dashboard, at least to me, is you'll notice no wood trim. Yes, I know this kind of looks like wood trim, and so does that bit over there on the doors, but that's actually imitation wood. I asked the Lexus team if this is a new trend that we should expect to see in other vehicles, whether it was environmentally oriented or not. They didn't really have much of an answer for me. They just thought that this particular customer was maybe more interested in what they're offering in here. I am certainly more interested in this big LCD in the middle of the dashboard. This is something that Lexus and Toyota have been doing for a while. As you can see, you can shrink CarPlay slightly, or you can enlarge CarPlay. I love the fact that they give you that option. That allows you to pull up these direct access buttons for various vehicle features. Everything down here is also part of the LCD. So this thing is so large, it has these climate control functions as part of the LCD all the time. Now, I mentioned the seat massage function. You get to it by hitting the car icon, hitting the seat controls button, hitting massage, tapping a seat, and then you turn the power on to the particular massage function. So it is kind of a buried item in that infotainment system. Over here we have a button for the 360-degree camera system. You'll find the trailer brake controller down here, and that is a standard feature. That's a nice touch that I hadn't expected for it to be standard. Big air vents there. Down here we have the drive mode selector. This allows you to select through the different drive modes depending on the version you get. You'll also get crawl control down there. ECT starts the vehicle in second gear. Tow haul mode right there behind the shifter, along with the stability and traction control. Over here we find two USB ports and a 12-volt power port. Pretty typical console shifter there. Auto brake hold, controls for the four-wheel drive system, for high and for low, and that center coupling lock. If you get the over-trail model, there'll be some additional buttons because you'll have the rear locker as well. Here in the center console, we get some more stitched materials. This is more imitation leather with after stitching here. Under my phone, which is connected via USB, but wireless CarPlay is also supported, we find two pretty decently sized, very square cup holders, so those larger drinks shouldn't have a problem. Then we find the optional Qi wireless charging mat. I was surprised that that is not a standard feature. We then have imitation leather here for the armrest. That opens to reveal an air-conditioned compartment. Nice touch if you're out there on safari. Moving back up to the dashboard, we find more of that imitation leather wrapping this upper section of the dashboard right there around the instrument cluster. We also have a full color heads-up display. The instrument cluster itself is a little bit difficult to show on camera because there is a little bit of glare that I hadn't really quite expected, and the display is not quite as bright as some. It is pretty configurable. It runs the latest version of the Lexus LCD instrument cluster software. There are 3 basic layouts you can choose from, and then lots of different options that you can select inside those menus. This is part of the driver monitoring system. It has little cameras that are making sure you're paying attention to the road. And then this is the most recent Lexus steering wheel design, common with a number of other models. Big paddle shifter is back there. Controls for the LCD instrument cluster, volume up, down, and track forward, backward are split on 2 different sides. And then over here we have the controls for the standard radar adaptive cruise control. What's really nice is that this is standard, and oddly enough, if you take a look at a Mercedes, for instance, adaptive cruise control is still an option on most models. Bearing in mind that the GX is available with 2 rows or 3 rows, your impression about the cargo area is going to depend on whether or not you actually plan on using that 3rd row. So behind the 3rd row, I appreciate the separately opening glass, but it's tricky even to get a small bag like that in and out because there's not a lot of room going on behind the 3rd row itself. If we open up that power hatch, you can see that this relatively slim backpack is just about all you can put back here. Maybe a jacket, maybe something like an umbrella stroller, not a lot of room going on. Let's go ahead and power fold the 3rd row seats. As you can see, they are relatively slow. I actually wish that these were manual 3rd row seats because it would be certainly faster to especially unfold them. It does take some time, but you are rewarded by having a very big and very, very square cargo area. That's the one huge advantage to the GX, perhaps a little bit more in the 2-row GX, is just the squareness of this cargo area opening. They have made it, interestingly, a little bit wider down here in this area than above, so that means you could probably put slightly wider, heavy, long items in here. All right, it's time to get the GX out on the road. The defining characteristics of this vehicle definitely have to be the twin-turbo V6 and the body-on-frame design. Let's talk about that twin-turbo 6 first. This is essentially the same V6 engine that we find in the Lexus LS, the Lexus LX, the Sequoia, and the Tundra, of course. And that makes a lot of sense because it means that parts are going to be easier to find, it's going to be easier and less expensive logically to service this long term. Lexus is definitely very focused on ownership rather than lease experiences on a lot of their vehicles, so they really program in a lot of that long-term dependability, a long-term durability into their products. So that's exactly why we find lower power outputs here than we find in some of the European competition. The engine is just less stressed. Unfortunately, that means slightly slower 0 to 60s than some of those European entries. In some preliminary testing out here in Arizona, some of the folks out here with me scored 6.4 seconds 0 to 60. That sounds pretty rational, and it's right in keeping with the entry-level engines in most of the competition. The downside to a body-on-frame design like this versus a unibody SUV like the BMW, the Mercedes, or the Land Rover is generally going to be driver connection to the road, driver enjoyment, handling ability, etc. It's not that the GX doesn't handle well, it does in general terms, but it's not going to feel quite as sharp as especially those European options. And you'll notice it in everyday driving situations. On this road here, even just going straight, you're going to notice there's not a great deal of feel to the steering. Steering is a little bit lazier, a little bit less connected to the driver and less connected to the vehicle as well. Obviously, in this over-trail trim, part of that has to do with the 33-inch all-terrain tires, but there's just the very structure and the very nature of the vehicle at play here as well. Ever since the first generation LX rolled onto the scene, Lexus has been a brand that doesn't just focus on luxury. They've also had an off-road focus with the LX and of course with the GX as well, because these are effectively Lexus Land Cruisers. This is the Land Cruiser 250 and the LX is the Land Cruiser 350. And that's part of why we find the body-on-frame design, all the off-road capable systems, and definitely different off-road capable systems than you'll find in the European competition, because Lexus has long preferred more durable and more long-lasting all-wheel drive components. So for instance, we find an actual torsion center differential in here. This is one of the few off-road vehicles that actually has a center differential. Something like a Grand Cherokee or a Land Rover, they have actually moved on to multi-plate clutch style arrangements. There are advantages to both of these kinds of setups, but the big advantage to this system is that it's always on and it's mechanically very simple. It also doesn't have the same kind of wear components that a multi-plate clutch system would, so fluid replacements are going to be a little bit less frequent, etc. As far as the long-term durability, you probably want a system like this. But oddly, we don't have a locking front differential, and I still think that's a bit of a miss for Lexus. That's also a bit of a miss for Toyota with the Land Cruiser line as well. Now, there are some reasons that they didn't do that. Obviously, weight, mechanical simplicity, the possibility of mechanical damage for someone engaging it when you really shouldn't engage it. All of those are valid reasons to not have the system. And there are definitely off-road situations where a front locker would be disadvantageous. If, say, you're crabbing across like a granite face, like say somehow you're off-roading on Half Dome, something like that, you don't want a front locker because you'll end up slipping down the surface. In those situations, having a very aggressive brake-based traction control system can actually provide you greater security and greater stability. But there are going to be situations where you really want a front locker, and here you're left to the aftermarket. That's your only option. On the other hand, we have some of the same changes that we find in the new Land Cruiser family, which is the ability to put this in 4-low while maintaining that torsion center coupling without locking it. You have the option to lock it independently, and that's a really cool touch. So you can have that locked capability when you want it, but you don't have to have it if you don't want it or you don't need it. Because again, there's situations where you want the lock and there's situations where you don't want the lock, and not all of the competition allows you this level of flexibility. Now's a good time to talk about some of the various different drive modes here. If we go down to the center console, the drive mode buttons I showed you earlier, drive mode is basically for on-road driving. Multi-terrain select is the option that's available now because we're in 4-low, and we now have this crawl control button. This is a good time to talk about crawl control because previous generations of Toyota's and Lexus's crawl control system honestly was pretty terrible. It was probably the worst crawl control in the industry. It was herky-jerky. You would feel the entire vehicle bobbing back and forth. You'd hear the ABS system actuating. Right now, we are crawling along nice and slow, and as you can see, it is super, super smooth. So this is a significant improvement. We then rotate the knob if you want to crawl a little bit faster, so we can use that to adjust our speed. This is a little bit different than some of the competition that uses shift paddles or the shifter here to adjust your crawl level. I hate to tell you, but the more serious off-road course is closed because yesterday we had some torrential downpours, so they won't let us play out on the moguls. I think that is a pity because that really would be the place where you would really see the articulation of this suspension. But I'm going to go ahead and ask Travis to hop out because you'll see some of it here. So as we drive along this section of the road here, you'll notice that KDSS allows a lot more suspension flex without exactly some of the technology that we find in most disconnectable sway bars. Because most disconnectable sway bars, they're connected or they're not connected. You can't vary effectively the amount of connection that you have. And in this setup, they can do that. So this can much more rapidly adapt to on-road and off-road driving situations. The downside, obviously, is that systems like KDSS are more expensive to manufacture and implement, which is why we don't find this, for instance, in the new Toyota Tacoma. A tight turn like this, I'll just go back and forward so you can see it here. This is one big reason why I love having a true open center differential. Again, very rare in an off-road vehicle, because we don't get that same sort of binding feel, even in 4-low, that you would get in practically anything else out there with a 4-low. The only obvious exception that I can think of right now is the Ineos Grenadier. It's one of the only vehicles out there like this with an actual center differential. Won't find that in a Grand Cherokee, won't find that in the current Land Rover lineup, and that really means a lot of flexibility. All right, we're now out in the Luxury Plus trim, which has the adaptive air suspension on the more street-focused tires and a slightly different suspension tune. What do you think about this adaptive suspension? I think it's a little on the firm side.
I think so too. As far as the comfort end of it, when you're all the way over, it's relatively comfortable. But the fact that you can ratchet it up as much as you can seems unusual.
Yeah, Sport Plus is surprisingly firm. We felt every little pebble on the road. But because the adaptive suspension system is not an adaptive anti-roll system in the Luxury Plus or an anti-tip dive system, you still get a surprising amount of body motion here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tall vehicle, and because that side to side isn't controlled, it just accentuates how tall you are.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's a problem, but it is noticeable.
And it's something similar to what I noticed in the Lexus LX. Like the firmest mode just seems a little bit out of place for the personality of the vehicle. And in my mind, I prefer the GX and the LX as more of a comfortable luxury highway cruiser than a Canyon Carver anyway. So it seems to me that the softer suspension tunes just make a bit more sense.
Yeah, and the GX being geared towards off-road, we wouldn't really want a firmer suspension tune anyway, off-road or otherwise. So a Sport, and especially Sport Plus, seems unusual.
Yeah, we're really noticing it out on this section of the road right here. I do think that this one is a little bit quieter inside than the last one that we tested. Obviously, there's going to be less tire noise in this model than in the all-terrain tire-equipped model. But again, higher speeds, you're really going to notice the squareness of the vehicle, I would say.
Yeah, and a little bit of wind noise as well, and that's just because of the boxy nature of it. The utility factor, there's the aesthetics of it, but the drawbacks do make themselves known.
Now, compared to the competition, ride quality and handling ability, that's an interesting tricky thing to answer. I know a lot of folks on our Facebook page were asking about that. How does this drive specifically compared to, the BMW, the Mercedes, the Audi, the et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And, none of them are like this. I think that's where I come across. Pure driving enjoyment, I would say they're all better.
Yeah, and it's because of their on-road focus, and on-road is not where this is meant to be on a regular basis, or it's not what it's designed for. So when you make those changes to get more clearance, more articulation, a lot of that sacrifice happens to the fun to drive nature of it when you're not off-road, and you feel that. But if you find yourself doing that, this is fully capable. It's just understanding your needs and making sure you pick the right vehicle for it.
And if you do get the model with the adaptive suspension system, I would say keep it in comfort. I'm not sure what mode we're in right now.
We're in comfort right now.
We're in comfort. Oh, we are in comfort right now.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I would argue that the adaptive air suspensions available in the Jeep and the Land Rover are definitely more comfortable than this one here. Now, Travis, you pointed out one thing that we accidentally skipped over for a lot of this video, and that is that there is an Infiniti competitor to this. It's the only Japanese alternative, really.
Yeah, and this is a segment that is pretty full already, so it makes sense that one might slip through. The question is it a better alternative, or is it just an alternative?
I will say that at least for the moment, if you want something in this category, and I guess there's a debate, Lexus actually considers the QX to be in the larger category up with the LX. So is it an LX, is it a GX competitor? I don't know, I'll let you guys decide that, but of course you can get a V8 in it for the moment. We are going to see a new QX80 coming very, very soon, actually, in production on sale probably by the end of this year, and it's going to ditch the V8 by all appearances. But at the moment, you can get that 5.6.
I will say that just because it is a V8 does not make it a better engine. I mean, if you look at the changes here, we got a lot more power and similar fuel efficiency. So the engine change is not always about more fuel economy, but when we're talking about twin turbos and lower end torque, not just a higher number, but more available, moving on from a V8 is not always the worst thing you can do.
That's true.
If this is up your alley, what do you think you end up paying for it?
A little bit less than I had originally thought. The premium trim is going to be the base model. That's going to give you 3 rows on the inside for $64,250. That is solidly within the price range of some of the mainstream competitors, whether we're talking Bronco, Wrangler, Grand Cherokee, etc. The Overtrail model, $69,250. That's where the off-road version starts. We then get Luxury, $77,250, or the Overtrail Plus, which is the model we've been spending most of our time in today, $77,250. There are some other trim levels in the ladder, but that's the basic framework. And obviously you can add options on top of those base prices to ratchet your price tag up further. But any way you slice it, this is solidly less expensive than the Lexus LX, and, weirdly, a little bit less expensive than the Grand Cherokee can get too. Now, understandably, the Grand Cherokee is not a direct competitor to this because the average Lexus shopper is just not going to a Jeep dealer. But I will say that, in my mind at least, a Land Cruiser could be a very direct competitor to this. And I had expected just a bit more luxury differentiation between the two. And on the inside, yes, we do get more premium materials here and there, and we get a different screen layout in the dashboard. But intrinsically, so much of the GX is directly shared with that Land Cruiser that I had really hoped for just a little bit more of that traditional Lexus luxury on the inside. Bottom line, however, I think that the GX is a fantastic value. Yes, it starts a bit more than some of the German competition, but we get that excellent four-wheel drive system standard in every model, the trailer brake controller standard in every model, big screens in the GX as well, and I think an easier to use infotainment system than some of them. It's not as feature rich as some of the German options, but I think it is easier to use. So if you're looking for something that you're gonna buy rather than lease, I would definitely put the GX on your shopping list. Just know that there are gonna be more dynamic options out there, and there are gonna be options that are more traditional luxury on the inside out there. So if you really love really high quality leathers, you love wood trim, all that sort of stuff, you're not gonna find it in here. You will find it in the competition. And you will find those more premium materials as well in the Lexus LX.
Let us know what you think about the Lexus GX down in the comment section below. Do you like the changes that they've made to it? Is this on your shopping list? And if it is, what else has made that list? Because we want to know. We're a little bit torn ourselves. Find us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, X, any other social places. We'll be there. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.